Welcome to another Founder Group success story. I'm here with Jake Whitman with Really Good Boxed Wine. Love the name. We're going to dig into that in a little bit. Just so straightforward. I love it. And we convinced Jake to come in and have a chat with us and let us know where he is in terms of as a founder, as well as his fundraise for Really Good Boxed Wine. Want to say thank you again, Jake. Welcome and appreciate you doing
Thank you.
this.
Of course, happy to do it.
So what is Really Good Boxed Wine? Give us the pitch. Tell
Really
us.
Really good boxed wine is exactly what it sounds like. It's really good boxed wine. No, we're on a mission to kind of significantly change the quality perception and the quality of wine that goes in the boxed wine format. So when you think about boxed wine today, you probably think of, mediocre at best. A lot of you are probably thinking about your Franzia years, slapping the bag in college, right? Not very high. You don't really correlate it with high-end wine. But the reality is there's no technical reason why you can't put high-end wine into the bag and box format. And there are tons of benefits for consumers. And so we want to change that. So instead of kind of mass-produced, commercial grade, commercially farmed wines from kind of lower, sorry, I'm getting a phone call, from lower quality regions, we're partnering directly with high-end producers, award-winning winemakers, sustainably farmed vineyards that are making, call it $30 to $40 and up bottles of wine, and putting it into the box wine format. So relatively straightforward value prop, but the consumer perception that box wine is mediocre is a big hurdle to overcome. It's just kind of so ingrained in consumers' minds, but we're here to change that.
Okay, let me pull out the nugget of wisdom there. You saw pretty much a gap, or you saw something in the marketplace when it came to boxed wine. This is obviously a direct to consumer model. And you said, this is first principles thinking, which is really important to say, does it have to be this way? And so you questioned the perception and really the business model and everything in terms of putting commercial, just mass produced wine, and then that perception there's no quality, and said, hey, could we figure this out and change it? And sort of it's not a massive disruption, but it fills a gap. Walk me through, how did you go about validating this idea to the point where you said, okay, this is legit, let's do it?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think even 5 years ago, I'm not sure that the market was ready for this. And so as I started looking at the category, the idea sort of sparked during COVID, and we would buy boxed wine sometimes, and we were always disappointed by we love the benefits of it, right? Like it stays, just the quick kind of value props. It stays fresh for 6 weeks after opening. It's about 90% lower cost to produce, and it's half the weight. And so you can pass a lot of those savings on to consumers, which is why you can sell much higher quality wine for a lower price. And it's 50% better for the environment because of the production of glass, the shipping of glass, and all of that. So love the benefits of it, but there was this huge glaring hole, right? Like the wine just wasn't very good. So that was kind of the impetus for the conversation. So I think the first thing I did was looked at, well, is this possible, right? Is there a technical capability? Is there a technical reason why you just can't put high-end wine into the box? And there is one big one, which is you can't age boxed wine. It has about a year shelf life. Which on its surface feels like a big barrier until you look at the data that shows that 97% of wines that are consumed in the United States are consumed within a year, and 95% within 3 months. So that barrier, which is a perceived barrier, is not actually as big of a barrier as it seems. And you know what? If people are aging $100 bottles of wine, they should buy bottles of wine. That's what bottles are made for. I'm not telling you not to buy those if that's your thing. So the next thing I looked at was this direct to consumer versus 3-tier distribution model has been changing pretty significantly over the past several years. Wine is definitely the furthest along in terms of between beer, spirits, and wine in terms of the ability to sell direct to consumer, but a lot of the infrastructure wasn't set up for the past couple of decades. It's really been built on someone goes to Napa, they love this wine. It's that winery really doesn't produce enough to have national distribution. They go back to their home in Ohio or wherever and want to buy that wine. that winery is able to now ship the wine directly to the consumers for the people who visited their winery. That's kind of how this was born. And over time, it's evolved, and as e-commerce and direct to consumer just in every industry has exploded, more and more infrastructure has been built. Consumers are getting more comfortable with buying wine online and along with everything else. And so there's just more infrastructure. So even 5 years ago, a lot of the fulfillment, a lot of the capabilities on compliance management through online carts and e-commerce platforms was just not there, and that's grown pretty significantly. And so there's now just more infrastructure to be able to tap into. And then the third one was on. I'm blanking on the third one. Those were two. I would say two of the big places that we were looking. Was those two.
Okay. Tell me, what is your team, co-founder configuration right now?
Yeah, it's me. I'm the only full-time employee, and I'm a solo founder, which has its pros and cons, of course.
Sure.
At the stage that I was raising, it was really just me with a couple of I had hired some co-packers and contract manufacturers and stuff like that. At this point, I have an amazing consultant that I sort of think of as an outsourced COO in some ways. She has deep experience in every corner of the wine industry, and we're in almost daily conversation. So she's not a full-time employee, but I think of her as a true partner in the business. And then I outsource a lot of the marketing work, media buying, email, and all of that. I've hired contractors to do all the web development and to build both front end and back end. I have a winemaker on retainer who makes the wines as we're bringing them in, bringing in the grapes, or is kind of finishing wines that we're buying from other producers. So I have sort of a team around me, but I'm the only full-time employee or kind of formal employee and solo founder.
Solo founder. Okay. I think that's important to point out because so many founders think they need to have a co-founder, but you've just found a way to be really resourceful and to outsource as much as possible while you focused on the core elements of the business. And so what would you say it was your superpower? Like, what do you bring that you think was most helpful in terms of being a solo founder and where you focused?
I don't have a wine background at all, so which definitely doesn't help. But I think I've seen a lot of different types of industries. So I spent a long time at Procter and Gamble in brand management, and the brand management function at P&G, while a gigantic corporation, so about as far away from startup as you can get, acts as the general manager of the business. And so we're not just directly accountable for the marketing, we're also accountable to the full P&L, top to bottom line. And so while we didn't directly manage product supply or finance or any of the other functions, we were accountable to their results, and ultimately we were the decision makers. And so you sit as sort of a mini, call it GM or even mini CEO of your business within the walls of P&G. And then when I left P&G, I worked in tech for 4 years. So I worked at Intuit for a couple of years, running the go-to-market team for the Intuit brand, and then spent 2 years as head of product marketing for SoFi Money, which is sort of SoFi's checking and savings account.
Sure.
And stepped in. I joined SoFi about 5 months after the Money product had launched, and it was had launched with existing SoFi members, and we were in more kind of growth hacky mode, trying to figure out how to grow SoFi Money broadly. And so I have a lot of kind of deep marketing, product marketing on the tech side, brand management on the CPG side. So I think I've seen the way these businesses are supposed to be structured and can kind of set my business accordingly.
It's great. I think it's important to highlight that you don't necessarily have to have domain expertise in the particular industry, but having domain expertise in terms of how to run a business, do a startup, e-commerce, consumer products, et cetera. That's just as good as if you were, if you were 30 years as a wine expert or what have you, and came from a big wine background.
And I think it's important also to know where your holes are and where your gaps are, right? Like, I am firmly aware that I don't have a wine background. I have devoured as much information as I possibly can. But I also brought on this consultant who does have deep expertise and was willing to pay her for her expertise even early on in the business. And that's kind of the obvious one, but like I've spent the last decade plus in marketing, but I've spent most of my time kind of managing marketing strategy and saying, okay, like this should be like, this is our email, or this is our strategy on email marketing. Like, let's go test with these different audiences and these creatives on Instagram and Facebook, but I haven't been hands on the keyboard doing it. And I knew I needed to hire somebody who was an expert in that, because I can have all the strategy in the world, but that doesn't help. That doesn't help as much in the startup world when you actually have to be the one executing.
So what did you do in terms of an MVP? Like, obviously, if you're not the wine expert, you're going to want people to try the wine. Like, did you have a bunch of wine tasting parties? Like, how did you get that MVP out there?
Yeah, so in March of last year was the first time I had a real conversation about this with anyone. In I think it was March. It was early March of 2021. I was sitting around the circle with my wife and brother and a couple of our friends, and we were drinking a bottle of rosé, and this topic came up. The next day I called a friend then I did all that deep dive research, and I was like, wow, there's something here. And so the next day I called a friend of mine who owns a winery up in Healdsburg, California, and just said, I can't get this out of my mind. What do you think? And her and I kind of went back and forth for an hour or so, and just like, oh, Jake, I think you might have something here. So we got on the phone the next day with her and her GM for another couple hours. And it went from her getting advice from them to saying, why don't we partner on the first one? Like, why don't we just use your wine? And they make this beautiful Pinot Noir from a 10-acre sustainably farmed vineyard. They sell their wines for $50 a bottle. And I thought they were going to be like, Jake, it's a great idea, but we're not putting our name on that thing. And they're like, no, this is awesome. Like, let's do this. So I was very fortunate to have one very important connection in the wine industry that helped me get the MVP out the door. And at least I knew that the wine was going to be super, super high quality for this very first one. Then I had to go do all the packaging and figure out the whole supply chain of filling it, which was its own gigantic challenge, and will continue to be for a long time. And some of that process, wine can't touch oxygen as it's being filled. So it's not as simple as taking a hose and pouring it into a bag and closing it. You need some level of specialized equipment, and there aren't that many high-end producers who are there are very basically no high-end producers making box wine, but even in like the Napa and Sonoma region, almost nobody even has a line to do it. So I bought a tabletop filler for like $5,000 that wow. Which is expensive, but compared to the cost of a full line it's like pennies, right? So that was kind of my first real investment in the business, was buying that filler and sending it up to what's called a custom crush facility. It's kind of a winemaker that makes wine for lots of different wineries in one location. Sent it up there. We set it up, got a designer to design a first round of the box, bought some bags and filled them with a tabletop filler. They called it a toy when they were making the wine. They were like, this thing's literally like a toy. It's like 4 feet tall. It's like, I know, but it fills the bag. Let's do it.
Okay. There's so much that you did there that's just amazing. So first, to at least validate your idea, you had a conversation. And I think that's important, that a lot of founders will just start spending money before having a conversation. And that's so important. At least put something together, like, this is my concept, problem, solution. Do you even understand what I'm trying to do? And you just happen to have a great conversation with a contact that immediately not only validated your idea, but said, I want to participate. So you got that. Yeah. And then you figured out, which is the nature of an MVP, what is the minimum effort, resources, what is the minimum level of commitment I can make to validate or invalidate my idea. Now, in your case, you needed to spend $5,000, and people have spent tens and hundreds of $1,000s to build an app before anybody else sees it, right? So you're filling this. Now, from there, what did you do? Did you have, you throw parties, you send it around? Like, how did you know this could actually work? The perception might change in terms of what boxed wine is, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, first, I remember the third one point I was trying to remember earlier,
Sure.
which I think is relevant to that question, which is, 10 years ago, screw caps and synthetic corks were like blasphemy, and now you have high-end wines that are in screw caps all the time. 5 years ago, canned wine exploded on the scene, and now you have all these producers making high-end canned wines. There is a progression of consumer acceptance of non-bottle and cork formats that you're really starting to see in the data, and so between that, the growth of e-commerce, and all the other stuff I was talking about was kind of how I validated the idea before starting to spend the $5,000 and hiring a designer for $3,000 and all the stuff that the initial investments that you need to make. So I thought it would be really, really important before I went and before I spent too much investment to actually validate the idea in market. So I decided to fill a couple hundred boxes, which is not an insignificant amount of wine, but it's like it's 4 bottles in each box, so about 800 bottles worth of wine. So not an insignificant amount, but we're not putting $100,000 into the business to start. And I did a really limited test launch. So I'm physically based in Cincinnati, Ohio. I got everything set up so that we could sell legally in Ohio. And did a super, super limited controlled test market in Cincinnati to see if people would actually buy this thing. I spent the first 3 months or so as I was building up to it, kind of through word of mouth, building a waiting list. I think waiting list is like gold for when you're during the development phase. Get a waiting list and get people excited so you have a captive audience as soon as you're ready to launch. I continue to kind of tap into that strategy even as we're a little further along. Build a waiting list. Ask friends to share it on their social pages, all of just kind of almost $0 type of stuff. I think I spent like $200 in any kind of marketing spend at all in the first with this first kind of pilot launch. And then I pitched a lot of local outlets to see if I could get some earned media buzz around the idea to help kind of jumpstart it and get people who are not my friends and family to buy the wine. I mean, it's great if your friends and family buy it, but it's a lot better if people you don't know buy it, right? That tells you a lot more. So got the couple hundred boxes, about 200 boxes produced. Got the waiting list started to get built, put all of the social pages and stuff like that together. Got set up with Klaviyo, got all the connections with Shopify, and then launched. And it was like, all right, let's see what happens. And it was great. We sold through in about 5 days. People were excited about it. I thought it was going to be a higher percentage of people who I knew, and it wasn't. It was less than 50% people I knew. I thought it was going to be like 80 or 90, right? And so that was sort of the first validation of the idea of like, okay, this is a product that people want. We've only sold a couple, we've sold, call it 100 boxes to people who we don't know. So it's not like this has exploded out into the world, but it's starting to validate the idea. So that was the very first one. And then I can fast forward a couple months. I wanted to do a national pilot as well before we kind of put, again, the $100,000 investment or whatever we're going to put into the business. So in November, we kind of got all of the connections and supply chain and compliance stuff set up to be able to sell nationally. We sell to 39 states plus DC right now, and did a second pilot nationally. And I made more boxes, but not significantly more boxes of the same wine, of the same Pinot Noir, and sold out of those in about 4 days. And we had like 26 states represented. People from all over the country started buying it. And I was like, okay, now we've got something. Now I feel confident that we can go start investing real money. We can start moving away from this tabletop filler and find a co-packer and kind of get a little bit more structure around the supply chain, get the fulfillment process all ironed out, and go for the national launch.
As an investor myself, angel investor and a startup founder, these are the things I love about your story, right? Let me ask you first before I point them out. Were you bootstrapping all point time? Did you get some friends and family money? Like, how did you pay for all this? Because it's not $100,000, but it's not an insignificant amount of money that you put in for these tests.
Yes, true. I bootstrapped the first 2 tests. So I put in about, I probably spent $30,000 or $35,000 of my own money on this. I actually raised I raised in August of 21, about 3 weeks before that first pilot. So I actually raised before the pilot, but the raise was for the full national launch as soon as we were ready. So through the first two pilot phases, I basically spent my own personal investment into the business and kind of used the money that the money that I'd raised even before the first pilot to give confidence that as soon as we're ready to scale, we can start signing some longer term contracts with wine producers, other wine producers, and get in with the co-packers and put down payments. So I was spending a little bit of it, but it wasn't for the pilot launch. It was to enable the national launch.
Okay, wait, and where did this, if you are willing to share, where did this money come from? Did you have savings? Were you working a full-time job? Were you consulting? Like, how did you cobble that $35,000 together to spend?
It's savings.
Okay.
Yeah, savings.
And are you working a job at the same time, or you're just all in?
I'm not. I'm all in. So I left SoFi. The quick story of how I got here, and this is a little bit of a tangent, so I won't talk about it too long. But
sure.
I left SoFi in December of 2020, and my initial plan was to raise a fund to find a business to buy. I was moving back to Cincinnati, and I wanted to raise a search fund to buy. And so I was actively looking for sourcing businesses. I had left SoFi; that was my full-time thing. And then this like inkling of an idea started popping up, and it went from a pet side project. The more I looked at the data, the more I talked to consumers, the more I talked to winemakers, the more I looked at the industry. I was like, I got to do this. So I put the search to buy a business on pause, and went after it all in. And that was like May of 21. And then we launched this pilot in August.
Okay. So you were in a situation and you started to develop an itch, and you said, I got to scratch this itch before I, buy another business. And here we are today. Okay. So what I love the story, because for me as an investor, I'm listening to you as a founder, and you are already validating the market. And it's not just, hey, people have told me it's really great. You put your money where your mouth is, and you've gone out and done it. So I'm listening, and the way that you've approached it to me means that I'm going to trust you with my money. First, you're going to spend your own money before you want to spend investors' money. You're willing to put your money where your mouth is, as I said. But then, you sell out your first run in 5 days, and the next one you go a little bigger and bigger. So you are iterating, obviously, as you go, but you're doing these control tests, which speaks to your marketing background has served you really well. Plus, you didn't spend $10,000 on AdWords and what have you right out of the gate. You just wanted to see, is this product good enough that people are going to talk about it? And not only did you not just sell to your friends, that word of mouth and everything like that expanded to the point where strangers are buying this. Huge validation point. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I was very happy to see the data as it was coming in. I mean, I didn't know at that time, and now I am confident that there is a huge market for this, but at the time you're testing and validating, you're seeing if it's there.
Well, and we know the TAM, the total addressable market, is huge. Okay. Yeah. And how are we going to get there? And that's where we want to see, the serviceable, your SOM, obtainable market, right? And so you're developing that. And again, I'm just going to harken back. The fact that you're so data driven speaks to your marketing background, and which serves founders extremely well. And I highly recommend it. Live off the data. Investors love the data. So then now let's talk about the next phase. So you just went through a fundraise. And so walk me through, how did you do it? How much did you raise? What was that like?
Yeah. So we actually raised in August, right? We raised in August before the Cincinnati pilot. So I was about 3 weeks out, and so we raised back then, which was I had sort of a debate, right? I said, should I wait until after the pilot launch to start the raise, or do I actually raise the money ahead of time, pre-revenue?
Sure.
Which has its pros and cons, right? Like,
absolutely,
there's benefits, and the reason why I wanted to raise before I launched was I knew that if this took off, I would want to be able to move quickly. And my fear was if I waited until we launched in late August, we need 2 weeks to see sales come in. We need another, I mean, we're analyzing all the time, but called another week or two, like fully kind of wrap your head around the data. All of a sudden we're going to be in October and we haven't raised any money yet. And so my thought was, I'm not going to use this investment for this initial pilot, or even necessarily really use the investment for the national pilot a couple months later. But I want to be ready, and
Sure.
I thought I would get behind the eight ball if I waited too long. So I started having conversations with investors about 6 weeks before I actually formally raised. So I was like in early June, mid-June maybe. So I had kind of fully jumped in May, and I started talking and picking the brains of some investors by mid-June. The idea was kind of progressing along. I kind of put a deck together. I was like, this is the vision. This is what we're looking to do. But my initial conversations were not, I'm raising money. My initial conversations were, what do you think about this idea? What do you think how should we be building this? Like, what is your advice as an investor for what you'd be looking for?
Okay. Hang on a second. I just got to point this out because this is so important. So first, you really thought it through. You wanted to have dry powder, for when it's coming. Great reason to raise as well. You put a deck together, and instead of asking for money, and this is the adage, if you want investment, ask for advice, and if you want advice, ask for investment, right? So who were the people that you were talking to? Because it's a different type of investor you're going to speak to pre-revenue. So you're in pre-seed. So who were you talking to? How did you find these people? Give a little more context of the people that you're talking to.
Yeah, it was from a number of different places. And I thought about this as a true kind of friends and family round. I didn't want to yet tap into institutional investors. I wanted to find people who are willing to people who could afford to do a real investment, but we're willing to kind of lean into the idea. So, I really tapped into my personal network. I talked to former bosses who I had great relationships with at Procter and Gamble and Intuit and so. If I talked to some of them, I talked to some local Cincinnati entrepreneurs. There's some people who are heavily involved in the Cincinnati entrepreneurship community, and I had moved back by then and was kind of reintegrating myself into the Cincinnati community, and so I talked to some of them. I'm personally a sort of what's called an ascent member of an angel investment group here in Cincinnati called the Queen City Angels. It's sort of call it a junior group. You put a one-time investment in, you can participate in everything. You just don't get voting rights in the group. And so I talked to some of them, and I thought that this angel group does not invest in in consumer product type businesses, but there are a lot of former P&Gers in there. So there are people who invest on their own in these types of businesses. So I started talking to some of them. I looked far and wide. I put a list of 50 people together who I thought potentially could have interest in this, and started reaching out to everybody. And to your point, I was not asking for money to start. I was definitely asking for advice, and I had put a deck together. And so I said, I'd love I'm moving toward a raise. It wasn't just advice on the business. I was like, I'm going to be looking to raise money for this business. I would love to get your advice on, one, the business overall, but two, like, is this a compelling story about what we're trying to tell? And is there anything that is there anything you'd be looking for as an investor that's not in here? And let's talk about it.
So let's get tactical for a second. Playbook, because I think this is important. When you're reaching out to this list of 50 people, so first you identify your list, super important. You're just not shotgunning out there and BCCing everybody on a single email.
No.
What is that email? Is it, hey, I've got an investment idea, want your feedback, here's my pitch right off? Or is it, hey, can we just catch up and talk? I want to give you an update. Like, how much detail are you doing in that first contact?
It highly depends on the person.
Gotcha.
Because most of these people I knew personally, or I had one degree of separation with. So some of them I texted and was like, hey, I've got an idea. Can you meet for let's grab a beer and I can share this idea with you. Some of them were more formal, where I said, so-and-so is, I have this idea. So-and-so has introduced me. You have experience in the space. I'd love to get together and share a little bit about what we're doing. I don't think I sent anyone the deck without them asking to see it. I don't think
Okay.
I did not copy the deck to anyone, even if it was just a text. I was like, hey, I've got a deck. Would you take a look at it? Let me know.
Great.
Let me know what you think. So it was a lot of, I wanted people to show at least some level of interest in engaging before I sent them the deck.
Okay. And so if I may ask, how much did you raise out of that friends and family, dry powder round? Let's just call it that.
$310,000.
$310,000. And then how many investors were there? Like, what was the percentage that said, yeah, I'm in? Others were like, contact me later after you've, hit some milestones. And how many were like, just flat out, no, thanks, but no?
This was a humbling and fortunate experience of this raise. I received significantly more interest than I was expecting. And so my initial round that I was going in to raise $200,000. I had probably a 60 or 70% hit rate of people who are during the soft circling phase were saying like, I'm actively interested, and another 10% or so who were like, I might be interested, or like, there's, hey, call me when you're a little further along, but like,
Sure.
even for this raise might be interested. And there were a handful of people who were just like, this isn't the right time, but even they provide fantastic advice. Like they were super helpful in crafting the deck and getting everything ready. So it was probably 60% very interested, 60 to 70% very interested, 10% somewhat, and maybe 10 to 20 who were like, call me later.
And I'm going to say that's because you had a clear idea, clear problem, solution, value proposition. None of this was like, if you had to kind of confess, how much investment did you get from people like, oh, I just really like you and I owe you one? Like, was it all based on the merit of your idea, your network connection with them? Like, what was the breakdown?
Yeah. I don't think I got anything from someone who owed me one. I don't
Sure.
know that anyone would have invested for that reason. I do though think, like, I have had several of the investors and a couple of the bigger investors who say, we're investing in you as much as the idea. Like, if we didn't like the idea, I wouldn't do it. But I'm also investing in you as a founder because we believe that you can make this successful.
Perfect. So it's can you be, unless you've got a really huge track record, like let's say you're employee number one at Uber and you are designing the Uber killer, right? That's going to go for you, but you have to qualify yourself with a really great idea, problem solution, the value proposition. And then because they get to know you or they already know you or of you, it just de-risks the investment and adds their confidence and their motivation to invest in you. Yeah. And this is what we tell founders a lot of time, that investors don't invest in projects or companies, they invest in founders. But it's the project and the company, it's the actual product itself that gets the investor's attention, right? And then if you can be super clear on what, like communicating the value proposition, that helps investors say, okay, this is going to continue. So not only is Jake communicating very clearly with me, he's going to be able to do that with staff, with future investors, with customers, et cetera. Again, goes back to your marketing background, which I find incredibly interesting, that you've confessed. I wasn't into wine, but I do drink wine, and you just started scratching that itch. It's like pulling that yarn on that sweater. Okay.
Yeah, I like wine. I grew up in Cincinnati. It's bourbon town, right? Where I can see Kentucky from my house. Like we grew up, so I liked wine, and I was living out in San Francisco and spent more time up there and got to know this founder or this owner of this winery. So I had, as a consumer, was moving more toward wine and was enjoying it more and learning more about it, but no professional experience at all.
Okay,
all
great.
As a consumer.
Okay, so you raised 310,000. Have you raised any more, or what's the plan?
Yeah, have not raised any more yet, but I'm gearing up for the next raise.
Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna just show this, and so this is the recent deck that you sent me. And here's what I really love about it is, like, you don't need, you picked a name that just is so self-explanatory. It's like really good boxed wine, right? I like it, love it. And so now tell me, what's the reason you added this? I'm going to say that it's an announcement. So you added this kind of after as you're going. What's the reason you add this as your second slide outside the cover?
Yeah. So this so this was the deck that we raised the first round with. So this was
Okay.
call it six months ago that this deck was put together. Um, I think it's helpful to show where are we, right? Like
Sure.
so I wanted to say, like, we're going to go through this whole deck and I'm going to talk you through this business, but like, let me just lay the groundwork of where we are today, right? We are a week away from our first production. We are making boxes like next. I'm flying out to Sonoma next week to make these boxes, and we are gearing up very soon for our national launch. We've got plans in place to drive 10,000 revenue in the first month, which is we hit over that in the first 5 days, so we were able to over deliver that. We were building a waiting list, and we'd started talking to some Cincinnati wine bars and retail about getting distribution. So it's like, let's just lay the groundwork of where we are today, and I'm going to tell you more details about it. But like, this is where I'm sitting, and the day I'm talking to you.
Okay, so let's back up. I think this is important because I don't want founders to get confused. In terms of the process, you're already sort of giving the elevator pitch by email. So you're talking to you get this really great idea. It's called Really Good Box Wine. Here's what we're doing. And therefore they already know what you're doing. So it makes sense to give them sort of, this is like your current traction, and you give them the highlight right up front. It's a lot similar to what Facebook did. Is Facebook's first pitch deck was just a thing talking about how everybody's addicted to Facebook at Harvard, right? So that's what happened there. So I think this is important to point out that if you do have that and you have traction, something meaningful, and I love the fact, you got a picture right there, like this is a thing that exists. It's not an idea, you're not a concept phase. And so then if you have that, bring it up front, but remember they have to have some context ahead of time to know what they're looking at.
That's right.
So that was helpful. Okay.
And,
so
that was also, remember, this was the actual pitch deck. So I had been soft circling for 6 weeks.
Sure.
And so a lot of the investors who I pitched this to had already seen an iteration of this deck at some point, right?
Okay,
and so this was the second, third time I'd come back and talk to them and said, okay, here's where we're sitting today. Let's go through the rest of it.
I love it. And that's important. So pitch decks that you send kind of cold, we've never met, are different than pitch decks where you've been, as you call, soft circling, and now I'm sitting in front of the person, which is really important. And founders sometimes think silver bullet, one pitch deck fits all. No, it never does.
No.
Never does. No. So then, okay, so I'm just going to go through a problem. Yeah, just the slides. We don't have to go into, because we've got all these courses on how to develop all the problem statements, et cetera. So you go standard problem, solution, and then you showed, okay, so this is more validation that your product actually exists. And then this is sort of how the product works, like what goes into a really good boxed wine.
What is it? What is the product?
Yeah. What is the product? Explaining. And then you've got business operations. So this is sort of everything else, like how you're actually fulfilling the product. What is the product? How you're going about it. And then this is your go-to-market strategy.
I would argue, so this is actually less of a go-to-market strategy. I think this is a slide that is not kind of a standard pitch slide, I would say, but the number 1, 2, and 3 barrier to my business is the consumer perception that box wine is mediocre.
Sure.
Right. And I wanted to address that. And and that's part of the name of the brand. Like, this is really good box wine. You may not believe it yet when you see it, but you know what we're trying to do. And then it's up to us to tell you the story of why that's the case. And so the vision is really to hit the misconception right on the nose rather than trying to like skirt around it. This is not called Cellar James wine that happens to be in a box that we're trying to hide the fact that it's in a box. Like, we are going straight on the barrier. And so I wanted to say, like, these are the things that you may have in your mind as a consumer of misconception, or like, what do we need to communicate? So let's just talk about what are these objectives that we need to accomplish, and what are we doing about it in our packaging communication strategy. It in everything that we're doing, we're addressing these four kind of objectives in our communication.
Okay, and that's what we call a preclusion. So it's like, you know, as you're talking conversationally, you can say, I know what you're thinking. Box wine is really mediocre, right? And so this is how we're going to overcome it. So if you know they're going to be thinking about it, to get ahead of that is absolutely fantastic. So I love that as well. Okay, so then revenue model. Okay, this is how we make money. Customers. So this is explaining a little bit more about your go-to market strategy in terms of personas. And then here's the market. So you're addressing this. This is how big it is. This is how big it could be. Your team, we're the ones to pull it off, right? So you put that there, which is great. I love the logos and the sort of credibility that you're bringing there. And then what you're raising, and you're raising $200,000, but clearly you were oversubscribed and you decided to put some more dry powder into that war chest there. And then you had a nice conclusion slide. This is really interesting and a good conversation point to kind of summarize everything. And then you add more information. This is another really great thing that you did. You can always add more information once you get it, depending on how the conversations go. So tell me a little bit in terms of, what were the conversations like? Did you get through the whole deck? Were they polite? Did they interrupt you the whole time? Or they say, yeah, I don't need to see the deck. Let's talk about, you know, some other things. What was that like?
Most conversations were discussions, and none of them were just a straight pitch. None of them ended up being taught, you know, to do a 90-second pitch or a 3-minute pitch or a 5-minute pitch or a 10-minute. Like, none of them just ended up going all the way through. They were always discussions, and I wanted that. Everybody also I had sent the deck ahead of time, and so, you know, I started with, have you read it? Do you want me to pitch? Do you want me to just pitch this, or do you just want to start talking and like asking questions about it? And most of them didn't need the full me to like go through the entire pitch process. One of them, who ended up being one of my biggest investors, though, I did do the full pitch, and I had done it in practice, but it was actually it was like a week into the fundraising process. So I'd already had these meetings, but it was actually the first time I had to actually do the pitch. And I think if I had to do it again, I had some learning experiences coming out of that first one, even though I was already a week into the fundraising process.
Sure. I'm going to make sure that founders who are pre-revenue really watch this, because here's one of the most powerful things I would have, if I was, you know, listening to this investment round, that my money's not going to building the product. You've already put that there. You're already doing it. So even though you're raising pre-revenue, you're not raising technically pre-seed. You're fine. You can say, you know what, before I use any of the money, I've got this plan to validate this, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously, you know, if your tests were a complete flop, you invalidated, you'd be having some other type of conversation with investors at that moment in time. Right. So I think that's fantastic. Now, you know, I could pick your brain all day long. This is absolutely fantastic. This has been like a master class in terms of validating a product, getting it out there, talking to investors, pre-revenue raise, friends and family around. So it's been amazing. Tell me a little bit about, like, what do you want founders to know? And in the founders group community, you've been with us for 5 months. And how could they possibly connect with you, or what would be the reasons for them to connect with you?
Yeah, well, first of all, you can connect jake@reallygoodboxedwine.com is the best way to get in touch with me. So I'll just start off there, and feel free to reach out anytime. Always love talking to fellow entrepreneurs. This is a hard world that we live in. The day in and day out is obviously challenging for all of us. So I'm happy to talk to anyone who's interested in chatting. You know, there is the adage of, you know, like, run slow to run fast. And I think in the hyper speed venture world that we live in these days, especially in tech and especially on the coasts, I think there's this expectation that you need to raise $2 million just to get a product out the door. And I just don't think that's true. Like I think you put yourself at, this is a growth, don't get me wrong, this business is a growth company. I'm gearing up for a second raise. As soon as we have validation of what's working in the market, I'm ready to pour money into the marketing spend. Like, this is not a lifestyle business that I'm just going to kind of sit on for 20 years and grow 5% or not care if we decline, whatever. Like, this is a growth business. But I think we learned a lot in this first 6 months of validate, and not putting too much investment in, so that when we are ready to turn the jets on, we just have so much more information to lean onto. And we're not just, I have another founder friend who's going more, they raised 7 million off the bat. And he's like, Jake, we are literally lighting money on fire right now. And he's like, that's what the VCs want. And like, they want us to find growth at all costs. And so we're doing it. But I hope they're successful, of course. I mean, of course I hope they're successful, but they've given away a lot more of their business because they raised so early. And I'm sure they have plenty of learnings now, but I don't know that they learned as much in the first 6 months. And so I would just say, like, if you can do it, validate as much as you can, as cheaply as possible, without skimping so far that you can't get the learnings that you need to kind of inform where you're going to go from there. But I think that's the most important thing. And that's a conversation I had early on with one of my investors. Is he's like, my fear is that you're going to flush so much money into this business so fast that you're going to actually run out of money before you need to go raise again. And I was like, it's not really the vision, but I'm glad we're talking about this, because this is a growth business. But let's do this. This whole run slow to run fast thing, I think, is an important mantra.
Great principle. Okay, last question, a little bit of a selfish one.
Yeah.
What's it been like being part of founder groups? What would you recommend in terms of the experience, what other founders should take advantage of?
Yeah, I love it. I use the requests group. You've probably seen my name pop up in the requests group of, hey, I need, anyone have experience with a legal agreement for the affiliate, for like an affiliate network? Does anyone have X, Y? I use it all the time. I've used the virtual assistant stuff a couple of times. So I think just, it's a great community, and I'm part of a couple other like local communities here in Cincinnati, and they give, you get the face-to-face and you get the local community feel, but you don't get the 1,000+ people who are all have all different experiences and different stages of their business to tap into. It's a really great national network. And then the monthly groups are great as well. I mean, you learn a lot from hearing the stories of the other people who are in your group. And even if it's not your specific topic, I usually find some nugget that's helpful or interesting for me to at least think about for my business. And then when we do get a topic that I'm working on, you have this group of people who are all hustling, trying to figure out how to make this thing work. So I found it to be a great resource. And I use it. I wouldn't say I'm on it every single day, all day, the way I know you are, but yeah, I'm in it pretty often, kind of poking around and asking questions and talking to people.
This has been fantastic. So all the founders, anybody who's been watching this, if you want to try it out, really good boxwine.com. And then also you can contact Jake, Slack or email. We can connect you. This has been absolutely fabulous. And like I said, you've kind of put out a masterclass in terms of playbook on how to launch validated product and raise that pre-seed. So looking forward to more conversations with you. And thanks again, Jake. This has been great.
No, yeah, thanks. It's been great chatting with you.